Episode 94, the Peak Performance Podcast. Today we are looking at the science of recovery, unlocking your body's full potential. Welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Brad Young, and today we're going deep, really deep, into one of the most underrated weapons in any athlete's arsenal, recovery. Not the passive kind where you collapse on the couch and hope for the best, but the deliberate, science-backed, almost obsessive kind that separates people who plateau from people who keep getting better year after year, decade after decade. Episode 94 is a big one. We're talking cutting edge recovery techniques, cryotherapy, red light therapy, wearable devices, active recovery strategies. And then we're going to pull back the curtain on Brian Johnson's famous longevity protocol and show you, the everyday athlete, how to build something just as powerful without spending $1 million a year. Then we're going to map out specific plans for different types of athletes, because a weekend trail runner has very different needs than a competitive CrossFit athlete or a master's swimmer trying to hold off the clock. This episode reads like a book, because that's how I want you to experience it. Sit down, get comfortable, and let's talk about what it actually means to recover, adapt, and perform at your absolute best for as long as humanly possible. Why recovery is the real training. Says things need to change around here. Says things need to change around here. The actual adaptation, the actual growth, the actual performance gain happens during recovery. When you understand that, everything shifts. You stop treating rest days like guilty pleasures and start treating them like the main event. Research published in the Journal of Physiology has demonstrated that muscle protein synthesis, the process by which your muscles rebuild themselves stronger after training, peaks not during exercise, but in the hours and days following it, provided the body has adequate nutrients, sleep, and reduced physiological stress. In plain terms, you can work as hard as you want in the gym, but if your recovery is a disaster, you're pouring water into a leaking bucket. The concept of supercompensation is central to this understanding. When you apply training stress to your body, your performance capacity temporarily dips. You're tired, sore, depleted. But given sufficient recovery time and the right inputs, your body doesn't just return to baseline. It overshoots it. It builds back slightly stronger, slightly more resilient, slightly more capable than before. This is the entire foundation of athletic progress. Miss the recovery window and you miss the adaptation. Chase it consistently and you compound gains over time in a way that becomes genuinely remarkable. Research from the European Journal of Applied Physiology found that athletes who systematically prioritize recovery strategies showed significantly greater improvements in both strength and endurance over a 12-week training cycle compared to those who trained with equal intensity but neglected recovery. The difference wasn't talent. It wasn't genetics. It was the discipline to recover as hard as they trained. The foundation: sleep is the master recovery tool. Before we talk about any device, any therapy, or any protocol, we need to talk about sleep. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, that science has discovered about recovery comes close to the power of high-quality, consistent sleep. If sleep were a drug, it would be the most effective performance-enhancing substance ever discovered. Every other recovery strategy we discuss in this episode is essentially trying to replicate or augment what a great night's sleep already does for free. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist at the University of California, Berkeley, has built an extraordinary body of work showing that during deep sleep, the body releases the majority of its daily growth hormone, repairs damaged muscle tissue, consolidates motor learning from the day's practice, and clears metabolic waste products from the brain through a system called the glymphatic pathway. When you cut sleep short, even by 90 minutes, you measurably impair reaction time, reduce anabolic hormone production, increase cortisol, and suppress immune function. A study in the journal Sleep found that athletes who extended their sleep to 10 hours per night over a multi-week period showed significant improvements in sprint speed, reaction time, mood, and overall athletic performance. So the foundation of your recovery protocol, regardless of your goals, budget, or athletic backgrounds, is this: Protect your sleep like it's your most valuable asset because it is. 7 to 9 hours for most adults, 8 to 10 for competitive athletes. Consistent bedtimes. A cool, dark, quiet room. No screens for at least an hour before bed. These are not optional soft suggestions. They are the bedrock on which everything else is built. Sleep duration. Aim for 7 to 9 hours for active adults, 8 to 10 hours for competitive athletes, training multiple days per week. Sleep consistency. Going to bed and waking at the same time every day, including weekends, regulates your circadian rhythm and dramatically improves sleep quality. Sleep environment. Keep your room between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Use blackout curtains and eliminate all artificial light sources, including standby lights on devices. Cryotherapy. Cold is medicine. Let's talk cold. Cryotherapy has moved from the fringes of professional sports into mainstream wellness culture, and for good reason. The research supporting its use for recovery is genuinely compelling. The basic premise is straightforward. Exposing your body to extreme cold triggers a cascade of physiological responses that accelerate recovery, reduce inflammation, and even stimulate hormonal changes that support performance. Whole body cryotherapy typically involves standing in a specialized chamber where the air is cooled to somewhere between -100 and -160 degrees Celsius for a duration of 2 to 4 minutes. Cold water immersion, the accessible version most of us can actually afford, involves submerging in water between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius for 10 to 15 minutes. Both approaches activate the same fundamental mechanisms, though whole body cryotherapy allows for more precise temperature control. A systematic review published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine analyzed more than 30 studies on cold water immersion and found consistent evidence of reduced muscle soreness, decreased markers of muscle damage in the blood, and faster recovery of muscle strength in the 24 to 48 hours following intense exercise. The mechanism appears to involve reduced blood flow to the muscles during immersion, which limits the inflammatory response, followed by a rebound effect when you warm up, where fresh blood rushes back carrying oxygen and nutrients. There's an important nuance worth mentioning here. Research from the Journal of Physiology suggests that using cold immersion immediately after every strength training session may actually blunt long-term muscle growth adaptations by interfering with the inflammatory signaling that drives hypertrophy. The current thinking is to use cold therapy strategically, after high volume competition or intense training blocks when rapid recovery matters most, rather than as a daily ritual following strength work. For endurance athletes and during intense competition phases, it's a genuinely powerful tool. Red light therapy, healing from the inside out. Red light therapy, sometimes called photobiomodulation, is one of the most exciting areas in recovery science right now, and it's finally becoming accessible to everyday athletes. The technology uses specific wavelengths of red and near infrared light to penetrate the skin and interact directly with the mitochondria inside your cells. Your mitochondria are the energy factories of every cell in your body, and when they absorb these specific wavelengths of light, something remarkable happens. They produce more energy, repair faster, and signal the surrounding tissue to reduce inflammation and accelerate healing. A meta-analysis published in the journal Lasers in Medical Science reviewed multiple controlled trials and found that red light therapy applied before or after exercise significantly reduced muscle soreness, decreased levels of creatine kinase in the blood, a marker of muscle damage, and improved muscle performance in subsequent training sessions. The effects were consistent across both untrained individuals and competitive athletes, which tells us this isn't just a placebo effect or something that only works under controlled laboratory conditions. For practical application, the research suggests that sessions of 10 to 20 minutes using panels that emit light in the 630 to 850 nanometer range produce the most consistent results. You want to be close to the panel, within a few inches to a few feet, depending on the device's power output, And consistency matters more than any single session. Using red light therapy 3 to 5 times per week, particularly in the morning to support circadian rhythm alignment or in the evening post training, appears to produce the most significant cumulative benefits. Home panels have dropped significantly in price over the past few years. Reputable devices from brands like Jove, Red Rush, or Mito Red Light can be purchased for anywhere between $200 and $600, a one time cost that pays dividends over years of use. We'll come back to budgeting when we discuss the Brian Johnson protocol translation, but red light is absolutely one of the tools that belongs in an accessible athlete's recovery stack. Wearable devices using data to train smarter. We live in the golden age of personal health data. 10 years ago, the kind of physiological monitoring that was available only to Olympic athletes and research scientists is now sitting on the wrist of every weekend warrior at your local park run. The question isn't whether to use wearable technology, it's how to use it intelligently without becoming so obsessed with the numbers that you lose sight of how your body actually feels. The most valuable metric most wearables track for recovery purposes is heart rate variability, the slight variation in time between consecutive heartbeats. This might sound like a trivial measurement, but it turns out to be one of the most sensitive indicators of your autonomic nervous system status and, by extension, your readiness to train hard. Research published in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance found that athletes who adjusted their training intensity based on daily heart rate variability readings made significantly greater gains in fitness over time compared to those following fixed training plans because they were pushing hard on days their body was primed for it and pulling back on days when additional stress would have led to breakdown rather than adaptation. Devices like the Whoop, Garmin Forerunner series, Polar H10, and the Aura Ring, and each have particular strengths. The Aura Ring is exceptional for sleep tracking and provides some of the most validated sleep stage data outside a clinical setting. The Whoop focuses almost exclusively on recovery and strain and does a remarkable job of educating users about the relationship between their daily habits and their recovery scores. Garmin devices are comprehensive performance monitors with solid heart rate variability tracking built in. The Polar Chest Strap remains the gold standard for real-time heart rate accuracy during training. The most important thing about wearables is not the device itself, but the habit of reflection they encourage. Seeing that your heart rate variability dropped after a night of poor sleep or a stressful week at work makes the invisible visible. It turns abstract concepts like "I'm probably overtrained" into concrete data that motivates behavioral change. Used wisely, these tools are genuinely transformative. Used obsessively, they can create anxiety around normal biological variation. Check your data, learn the patterns, then make human decisions about how you feel and what your body needs. Active recovery, moving to heal. Active recovery is perhaps the most underappreciated strategy in the entire recovery playbook. The concept is beautifully simple. Instead of doing nothing on your rest days, you do something, but something very gentle, very deliberate, and specifically designed to facilitate healing rather than create additional stress. The research on this is remarkably consistent. Well-designed active recovery accelerates the removal of metabolic waste products from muscle tissue, reduces delayed onset muscle soreness, maintains cardiovascular fitness during recovery periods, and perhaps most importantly, supports mental health and mood during hard training blocks. A study in the Journal of Athletic Training compared passive recovery, cold water immersion, and active recovery following high-intensity interval training, and found that low-intensity active recovery produced the fastest restoration of power output and the greatest reduction in blood lactate concentration in the hours following exercise. The mechanism is straightforward. Gentle movement keeps blood circulating through fatigued muscle tissue, delivering oxygen and nutrients while flushing out the byproducts of intense effort. What does active recovery actually look like in practice? It means a 30 to 45-minute walk at a genuinely easy pace. Not a power walk, not a hike with elevation, just movement. It means a gentle yoga or mobility session focused on areas of tightness. It means an easy swim where you're barely breaking a sweat. It means foam rolling combined with light stretching. The heart rate should stay low. below 60% of your maximum heart rate, and the duration should be long enough to get blood moving without creating a new training stimulus. One of the most powerful active recovery modalities that's gained significant traction in elite sport is Zone 2 aerobic training. Sustained low intensity cardio at an intensity you can comfortably hold a conversation through. Research from Inigo San Milan at the University of Colorado has shown that Zone 2 work is uniquely effective at improving mitochondrial function, enhancing fat oxidation efficiency, and building the aerobic base that supports recovery from higher intensity efforts. For most athletes, 2 to 3 Zone 2 sessions per week in the 45 to 90-minute range represents a recovery strategy and a performance investment simultaneously. The Brian Johnson Protocol, what it is and why it matters. Brian Johnson is a tech entrepreneur who sold his company Braintree to PayPal for $800 million and then did something genuinely strange and genuinely fascinating with some of that money. He turned himself into a human science experiment. His project, called Blueprint, involves spending approximately $2 million per year on a meticulously tracked, data-driven protocol designed to reverse his biological aging and optimize every measurable aspect of his physiology. He has a team of over 30 doctors. He eats according to precise caloric algorithms. He goes to bed at the same time every single night and has the sleep tracking data to prove it. He's quite probably the most monitored human being in history. Now, here's the thing about Brian Johnson that most people miss when they dismiss him as a rich eccentric. The principles underlying his protocol are not exotic. They are not proprietary. The vast majority of what he does is rooted in the same peer-reviewed science that you and I have access to for free. What Brian has essentially done is take all the best available evidence on longevity, recovery, and performance optimization and apply it with a level of consistency and precision that most of us never achieve, and then document the results publicly so the rest of us can learn from them. His biological age markers, measures of how his body is actually functioning relative to chronological age, have been published and independently verified. At the time of his most recent public data, his 40-plus-year-old body was showing physiological markers consistent with someone 10 to 20 years younger in multiple measurable categories. This is not a marketing claim. These are peer-reviewed measurements. And while you don't need a $2 million budget to move the needle on your own biological aging, understanding what Brian does and why, and then finding accessible equivalents is genuinely worthwhile. Brian Johnson's core protocol, breaking it down. Nutrition architecture. Johnson eats all of his calories within a 6 to 8 hour window, consuming roughly 2,000 calories per day, with an emphasis on whole plant foods, olive oil, nuts, seeds, and specific micronutrient targets. He never eats after early afternoon. His diet eliminates ultra-processed foods entirely and emphasizes the highest nutrient density possible per calorie consumed. Exercise consistency. Johnson trains for approximately 1 hour per day, 6 days per week, combining resistance training, cardiovascular work, and flexibility and mobility practice in a structured rotation. The emphasis is not on extreme intensity, but on consistent, varied stimulus that maintains every component of physical fitness simultaneously. Sleep optimization. Johnson goes to bed at 8:30 every night and wakes without an alarm. His room is kept at exactly 67 degrees Fahrenheit. He wears blue light blocking glasses from sunset onward and tracks his sleep with the Oura Ring. His average sleep scores are among the highest ever publicly documented. Recovery technology. His recovery stack includes red light therapy, targeted supplementation based on blood work, regular monitoring of over 100 biomarkers, and precision time nutrition around training sessions. He also uses compression therapy and deliberate sauna and cold plunge protocols. Living like Brian Johnson on a real budget. $2 million a year sounds impossibly out of reach, and for the exotic parts of Brian's protocol, it is. But here's the extraordinary thing. Researchers who have analyzed his regimen estimate that roughly 80% of the measurable benefit he achieves comes from behaviors that cost little to nothing. Sleep consistency costs you nothing but discipline. Time-restricted eating costs you nothing. Walking 10,000 steps a day costs you nothing. Eliminating ultra processed food from your diet might actually save you money. The expensive parts, the constant blood monitoring, the experimental peptides, the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, may account for perhaps 20% of the protocol and probably a far smaller percentage of the total benefit. Let's build a realistic, budget conscious version of the blueprint protocol. For nutrition, you're aiming for whole food, predominantly plant based eating with a 6 to 8 hour eating window. Brown rice, lentils, sweet potatoes, olive oil, nuts, berries, leafy greens, and fatty fish twice a week. This is the nutritional foundation at a cost of roughly $50 to $70 per week for most people. A study in the New England Journal of Medicine found that time-restricted eating, where we halt consuming all calories within an 8-hour window without changing what you eat, produced significant improvements in blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, and inflammatory markers over 12 weeks. For supplements, Brian takes over 100 pills per day, targeting specific deficiencies identified through regular blood work. The budget version, get a comprehensive blood panel done once a year. Many insurance plans cover this. And supplement only what your specific body actually needs. At minimum, most active adults in North America benefit from vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids. Research in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition found these two supplements produced meaningful improvements in muscle recovery, inflammatory response, and mood in athletic populations. The affordable technology stack for a budget-conscious Brian Johnson build looks something like this: an Oura Ring or a Whoop Band for sleep and recovery tracking runs between $230 and $30 per month on subscription. A mid-range red light therapy panel runs $300 to $500 one time. A gym membership or a set of home resistance equipment runs $30 to $100 per month. Cold showers cost nothing. A walk outside costs nothing. Total monthly investment, somewhere between $80 and $200 per month, puts you in the top 5% of recovery conscious adults on the planet. The anti-aging power of these strategies. Let's talk about aging, because this is where the recovery conversation gets genuinely exciting. The traditional view of aging was essentially fatalistic. You're born, you peak somewhere in your 20s and 30s, and then it's a long, slow slide toward decreased function, increased injury risk, and reduced capacity. The emerging science tells a fundamentally different story, one in which the rate of biological aging is far more malleable than we ever believed, and in which the behaviors we're discussing today are among the most powerful tools available to slow and in some measurable ways reverse the aging process. A landmark study published in the journal Cell identified several key drivers of biological aging, including mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, the accumulation of old damaged cells that stop functioning properly but refuse to die, chronic low-grade inflammation, often called inflammaging, and the shortening of telomeres, the protective caps on your DNA that act like the plastic tips on shoelaces. Every major recovery strategy we've discussed in this episode directly addresses one or more of these mechanisms. Red light therapy has been shown in multiple studies to improve mitochondrial function and reduce markers of cellular senescence. Cold exposure activates a protein called cold shock protein that supports cellular repair mechanisms and has been linked to activation of longevity-associated pathways similar to those triggered by caloric restriction. Consistent high-quality sleep is when your body performs the bulk of its cellular repair and growth hormone secretion, both critical for maintaining tissue quality as you age. Zone 2. Aerobic training is the single most powerful stimulus known for maintaining mitochondrial density and function, which are directly correlated with biological age across multiple studies. Research from the Mayo Clinic found that high-intensity interval training and endurance exercise actually reversed many of the cellular aging signatures, including mitochondrial volume and the expression of genes associated with muscle growth in adults over 65 years old. The capacity for adaptation, for growth, for biological renewal does not disappear with age. It diminishes if you don't use it, but it responds when you give it the right stimulus. You are never too old to start recovering better. Recovery plans by athlete type. Athlete specific recovery plans, the endurance athlete. Endurance athletes, runners, cyclists, triathletes, swimmers covering significant weekly mileage, face a very specific recovery challenge. Their training loads generate enormous cardiovascular and metabolic demand while simultaneously producing significant musculoskeletal breakdown, particularly in the connective tissues that high impact and repetitive motion sports stress most heavily. The primary enemies are overtraining syndrome, iron deficiency anemia, stress fractures, and the kind of chronic fatigue that develops when training volume exceeds the body's ability to adapt. For the endurance athlete, the recovery stack should be prioritized in this order. First, sleep duration should be on the higher end of the range, 8 to 9 hours consistently, with the understanding that high mileage weeks may require additional recovery through naps or extended sleep periods. Research in the Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise found that endurance athletes who slept 8 hours or more showed significantly lower rates of injury over a season compared to those sleeping 6 hours or less. Second, nutrition periodization becomes critical. Endurance athletes are often chronically underfueled, particularly female athletes who are at elevated risk for relative energy deficiency in sport, a syndrome linked to stress fractures, hormonal disruption, and impaired immune function. Adequate carbohydrate intake to support training, protein timing within 45 minutes post exercise, and consistent hydration are non negotiable basics that many endurance athletes neglect in pursuit of being lean. Weekly structure: 2 dedicated active recovery days featuring easy zone 2 movement, 1 complete rest day, and cold water immersion or contrast therapy following long runs and key workouts. Technology priority: heart rate variability, tracking to prevent overtraining, GPS data to monitor training load, accumulation and then sleep tracking to ensure adequate nightly recovery. Top recovery tools: cold water immersion, post long effort compression garments during and after racing, foam rolling focused on calves and hip flexors, and targeted magnesium supplementation for muscle relaxation and sleep quality. Recovery plans by athlete type. Athlete specific recovery plans: the strength and power athlete. Strength athletes: power lifters, Olympic weightlifters, CrossFit competitors, bodybuilders, and anyone whose training centers on moving heavy loads experience a distinct pattern of training stress. The primary demand is on the neuromuscular system, which undergoes significant fatigue during high intensity strength work in ways that don't always show up as muscle soreness but profoundly affect performance if not addressed. The central nervous system requires more recovery time than most strength athletes appreciate, and this is one of the most common reasons that dedicated lifters plateau despite increasing training volume. For strength athletes, the relationship between cold therapy and recovery requires a strategic approach. As mentioned earlier, regular cold immersion immediately after every strength training session appears to blunt some of the hypertrophic adaptation the training was designed to create. The current best practice for strength athletes is to use cold therapy primarily during deload weeks, during competition preparation phases when rapid recovery between sessions matters most, and during periods of very high volume when the priority is feeling fresh rather than maximizing muscle growth stimulus. Red light therapy is perhaps the most universally applicable technology for strength athletes. Research in the journal Photomedicine and Laser Surgery found that pre workout red light therapy sessions significantly reduced markers of muscle damage, decreased post workout soreness, and improved muscle strength recovery rates in resistance trained athletes. For a strength athlete, using a red light panel for 10 to 15 minutes before training sessions and for 20 minutes in the evening post training represents a research backed, side effect free addition to any recovery stack. Weekly structure: structured deload weeks every 4th to 6th week with significant volume reduction, daily mobility work targeting areas under highest training stress, and at least 1 full rest day per week with no resistance training. Technology priority: Hooper heart rate variability tracking to identify central nervous system fatigue, red light therapy panel for pre and post training, and sleep monitoring to protect the high quality sleep required for muscle protein synthesis. Top recovery tools. Protein consumption evenly distributed across the day, targeting zero point 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight, creatine monohydrate for muscle recovery and cognitive function, and targeted foam rolling and self myofascial release for fascia quality. Recovery plans by athlete type. Athlete specific recovery plans, the weekend warrior. The weekend warrior is arguably the most important athlete to get recovery right, and also the most commonly neglected in recovery literature that tends to focus on elite performers. If you're someone who works a demanding job Monday through Friday, exercises intensely on weekends and maybe once or twice midweek, and is somewhere between 35 and 60 years old, you face a unique set of physiological challenges. Your hormonal recovery environment is different from a 22-year-old. Your connective tissue repairs more slowly, your stress load from work and life is higher, and you're trying to compress the physical demands of an athlete into a schedule that doesn't always allow for the recovery that intensity demands. Research in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that the weekend warrior pattern of exercise, achieving recommended weekly physical activity in 1 to 2 sessions rather than spread across the week, and still provided significant cardiovascular and mortality benefits compared to being sedentary. But it also found elevated injury risk, particularly in adults over 40, who experienced higher rates of musculoskeletal injury than those who distributed their training more evenly. The recovery prescription for weekend warriors is therefore twofold: smarter preparation before intense weekend sessions and more deliberate recovery afterward. Midweek mobility and zone 2 work, even 30 minutes on a Tuesday evening, dramatically reduces injury risk on weekend by maintaining tissue quality and neuromuscular readiness. This doesn't have to be structured exercise: a 30-minute walk at lunch, a 10-minute mobility routine before bed, a bike ride with the kids on Wednesday evening. These are all adequate stimuli to maintain readiness and support recovery between more intense weekend efforts. Weekly structure: 2 to 3 brief midweek sessions of zone 2 movement or mobility work, deliberate warm-up protocols before weekend intensity, and active recovery the day following intense weekend activity. Technology priority: a basic sleep tracker to protect sleep quality during high-stress work weeks, and a simple heart rate monitor for ensuring zone 2 sessions stay genuinely easy. Top recovery tools: cold showers or accessible cold water immersion post-intense sessions, a structured 10-minute daily stretching routine, and consistent protein intake to support the tissue repair demands of intense but infrequent training. Recovery plans by athlete type. Athlete-specific recovery plans. The Masters athlete. Masters athletes, generally defined as competitive athletes over the age of 40, represent one of the fastest growing segments of recreational sport, and the science of their recovery is fascinating. The fundamental mechanisms of adaptation remain intact well into old age. Your muscles, your cardiovascular system, your bones, they all still respond to training stimulus with the same basic adaptive machinery they used when you were 25. What changes is the rate of recovery, the hormonal environment in which that recovery occurs, and the relative importance of specific recovery inputs that can compensate for age-related physiological shifts. Testosterone and estrogen both decline with age in men and women respectively, and both hormones play important roles in muscle protein synthesis, bone density maintenance, and the inflammatory response to exercise. Research from the journal Age and Aging found that resistance training 2 to 3 times per week was the single most effective intervention for maintaining lean muscle mass, bone density, and functional strength in adults over 50. More effective than any supplement, any hormone therapy at standard doses, or any other intervention tested. This means that for masters athletes, preserving and building strength through resistance training is not optional. It is the cornerstone of the anti-aging protocol. Protein requirements also increase with age. A significant body of research, including a meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, has found that older adults require meaningfully more dietary protein per pound of body weight than younger adults to achieve the same rate of muscle protein synthesis. The current evidence based recommendation for masters athletes is approximately zero point 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day, with emphasis on consuming a substantial protein serving of at least 40 grams within 2 hours of resistance training. Weekly structure: resistance training 3 times per week as the non negotiable anchor, 2 zone 2 sessions for cardiovascular health and mitochondrial maintenance, and 2 complete rest or gentle active recovery days. Technology priority: Oura Ring for comprehensive sleep and recovery tracking, red light therapy for mitochondrial support and joint recovery, and annual comprehensive blood panels to identify and address nutritional deficiencies. Top recovery tools: higher protein intake than younger athletes, strategic creatine supplementation shown to combat age related muscle loss, deliberate warm up and cool down extending to 15 minutes each, and cold therapy for joint inflammation management. Nutrition as recovery: eating to rebuild. Recovery nutrition is one of the areas where the gap between what the research recommends and what most athletes actually do is widest. The majority of people who exercise regularly treat nutrition primarily as fuel for their workouts. They think about what to eat before training, maybe grab a protein shake afterward, and consider the job done. The research tells a much more nuanced and important story about how everything you eat at every time of day either supports or undermines the recovery process. The first principle is protein timing and distribution. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that distributing protein intake evenly across 3 to 4 meals throughout the day produced greater muscle protein synthesis than consuming the same total amount in fewer, larger servings. This means breakfast matters. Starting your day with 30 to 40 grams of high quality protein sets up your body's anabolic signaling for the entire day. Each subsequent meal continuing to deliver 30 to 40 grams maintains this signal continuously. The second principle is anti inflammatory nutrition. Chronic low grade inflammation is one of the primary drivers of both slow recovery and accelerated aging, and certain dietary patterns powerfully modulate it. Research published in the journal Nutrients found that a Mediterranean style diet rich in olive oil, fatty fish, colorful vegetables, and fruits, legumes, and nuts significantly reduced circulating inflammatory markers in athletes over a 12-week period compared to a standard Western diet. Omega-3 fatty acids from fatty fish and flaxseed are particularly powerful. Multiple studies have found that supplementing with 2 to 3 grams of omega-3 fatty acids per day reduces muscle soreness after intense training and improves recovery of muscle function. The third principle, and one that Brian Johnson's protocol makes central, is the timing of your eating window. Research from the Salk Institute found that restricting all caloric intake to a window of 8 to 10 hours, regardless of the composition of the diet, produced improvements in metabolic health markers, reduced inflammation, and improved sleep quality. Apparently because the overnight fasting window allows cellular repair processes to complete without competition from digestive demands. For athletes, the practical implication is to stop eating at least 3 hours before bed and to avoid snacking late at night, even on healthy foods. Stress, the nervous system, and the recovery connection. No conversation about recovery is complete without talking about psychological stress, because your nervous system does not distinguish between the physical stress of a hard training session and the psychological stress of a difficult meeting, a contentious relationship, or financial pressure. From your body's perspective, stress is stress. The cortisol that floods your system during an intense workout is chemically identical to the cortisol that floods your system when you're stuck in traffic, making you late for an important meeting. And all of it draws from the same recovery budget. Research from the University of Utrecht found that competitive athletes who reported high levels of life stress outside of training showed significantly impaired recovery between sessions compared to athletes with similar training loads but lower life stress. And this manifested in both objective measures like heart rate variability and subjective measures like perceived fatigue and mood. The implication is profound. To optimize your recovery, you cannot compartmentalize your life into training time and everything else. Your sleep quality, your work stress, your relationship satisfaction, your financial anxiety, all of it shows up in your recovery data. The most evidence backed psychological recovery strategies include mindfulness meditation, which research published in Psychoneuroendocrinology found significantly reduces cortisol levels and improves heart rate variability when practiced as little as 10 to 15 minutes per day. Deliberate breathing practices, specifically slow diaphragmatic breathing at a rate of approximately 6 breaths per minute, activate the parasympathetic nervous system powerfully and have been shown in multiple studies to shift the autonomic balance from stress dominant sympathetic activation toward recovery dominant parasympathetic tone within minutes. Apps like Resonance or the free content from James Nestor's breathing research provide excellent guided practice. Nature exposure is another genuinely underrated recovery modality. Research from the Journal of Environmental Health and Preventive Medicine found that spending time in natural environments, forests, parks, bodies of water, significantly reduces cortisol levels, lowers heart rate, decreases blood pressure, and improves immune function compared to time spent in urban environments. Training outside when weather and circumstances permit isn't just pleasant, it's a measurable recovery input. Sauna the heat protocol for recovery and longevity. The Finnish have been onto something for a very long time. Sauna use has been a cultural institution in Finland for thousands of years, and now a growing body of rigorous scientific research is confirming what generations of Scandinavians knew intuitively. Regular heat exposure is profoundly beneficial for human health, recovery, and longevity. The science here is among the most compelling in the entire field of recovery research, and the practical barrier to entry is lower than most people think. A landmark longitudinal study from the University of Eastern Finland followed over 2,000 middle aged Finnish men for 20 years and found that men who used the sauna 4 to 7 times per week had a 63% lower risk of sudden cardiac death, a 50% lower risk of fatal cardiovascular events, and a 40% lower risk of all cause mortality compared to men who use the sauna only once per week. These are among the most striking mortality risk reduction numbers in preventive medicine. The dose-response relationship was clear. More sauna use meant better outcomes across every metric measured. For athletic recovery specifically, research published in the Journal of Experimental Physiology found that repeated sauna sessions following exercise increased plasma volume, the liquid component of blood that carries oxygen and nutrients to working muscle, which directly translates to improved endurance performance. Heat exposure also triggers the release of heat shock proteins, a family of cellular repair proteins that protect against the damage caused by heat and other stresses and have been linked to reduced risk of neurodegenerative disease. Additionally, sauna use has been shown to promote the release of growth hormone in a dose-dependent manner, with studies finding that an hour of sauna use can increase growth hormone concentration by a factor of 2 to 16 times baseline levels. You don't need a home sauna to access these benefits. Many gyms, YMCAs, athletic clubs, and community recreation centers have sauna facilities. The research suggests that sessions of 15 to 20 minutes at a temperature between 80 and 100 degrees Celsius performed 3 to 4 times per week produces most of the measurable benefit. Staying well hydrated before and after is essential. Many elite athletes combine sauna with cold plunge in an alternating contrast protocol, cycling between heat and cold 2 to 3 times per session for amplified vascular and neurological effects. Building your personal recovery protocol, a practical blueprint. Everything we've covered in this episode is only valuable if it translates into action, so let's bring it all together and talk about how you build your own personal recovery protocol, one that fits your life, your budget, your goals, and your current starting point. Because the worst protocol is the one you don't actually follow, and the best protocol is the one you execute consistently over months and years. Start with the foundations that cost nothing. Anchor your sleep to a consistent 7-day schedule. Set a bedtime and a wake time and protect them with the same commitment you give to your most important meetings. Begin eating within an 8-hour window. Start modestly with 10 hours if 8 feels too restrictive, and compress from there. Add a 20 to 30-minute walk every day, even on training days, as your baseline movement floor. These 3 behaviors alone, like consistent sleep, time-restricted eating, and daily low-intensity movement, will produce measurable improvements in recovery, body composition, energy, and markers of biological aging within 6 to 8 weeks. Layer in active recovery next. Replace at least 1 rest day per week with deliberate active recovery, an easy walk, gentle yoga, a slow swim. Add a 10-minute post-training mobility routine targeting your personal areas of restriction. Experiment with cold showers. Start with 30 seconds of cold at the end of your normal shower and build toward 2 to 3 minutes over several weeks. Then invest in one piece of recovery technology based on your budget and primary goal. If you want the single highest value purchase for most athletes, it's a sleep and heart rate variability tracker, Oura Ring, or Whoop, because the data it provides about your actual recovery status will guide every other decision you make. If you already have solid sleep tracking, a red light therapy panel is the next highest value investment. Build slowly, evaluate what works for your specific body and lifestyle, and remember that consistency over months matters infinitely more than perfection over days. The long game, recovery as a lifestyle. Here's the truth about peak performance and aging well. There is no finish line. There is no protocol you complete and then coast. The athletes who continue to improve into their 40s and 50s, who maintain their vitality and competitive edge in ways that make their peers marvel, are not doing something magical. They are simply doing the right things consistently with patience and with a genuine love for the process of caring for their bodies as well as they push them. The science we've covered today, cryotherapy and red light therapy, wearable devices and active recovery, the Brian Johnson protocol translated for real budgets, athlete-specific plans, and anti-aging strategies, all of it points in one direction. The body is not a machine that wears out with use. It is a living, adaptive, magnificently responsive system that gets better when you treat it with intelligence and intention. Recovery is not the pause between efforts. Recovery is the whole game. A landmark review published in the New England Journal of Medicine examined the lifestyle factors most consistently associated with living past 90 years in good health and cognitive function, and found that the top predictors were not genetics. They were not medications. They were not socioeconomic status. The top predictors were regular physical activity maintained across the lifespan, consistent sleep quality, minimal ultra-processed food consumption, strong social connections, and a sense of purpose and forward engagement with life. Every single one of these is a choice. Every single one is available to you right now. You don't need Brian Johnson's budget. You need his consistency. You don't need a cryotherapy chamber. You need the discipline to take a cold shower and go to bed at the same time every night. You don't need 30 doctors monitoring your biomarkers. You need the self-awareness to listen to your body and the patience to give it what it actually needs. Recovery is the practice of respecting the body that carries you through every experience of your life. Start there, stay there, and the performance will follow. The athletes who age best aren't the ones who trained hardest in their 20s. They're the ones who recovered smartest in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. Recovery isn't giving up ground. It's how you take it. Thank you for listening to episode 94 of the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Brad Young.